The Field of 68 Media Network presents Red is the New Orange, a Syracuse basketball podcast.
Vince intercepts a pass, breakaway for the freshman guard, he flies and slams! Aerial assault from Judah Mintz.
Looking to go back door to Bell, they get it to a near corner three, knocks it down! Chris Bell, the sharpshooter.
Bringing you everything you need to know out of the 315.
Up top, Williams surges ahead, up with the right hand and in. A pretty up and under move from Benny Williams to beat his man.
Over to Taylor, he skips into the lane, puts up a floater, it drops in.
Let's get it started with your host, Ian Unsworth and Johnny Gadamowitz.
Another first half special from the Syracuse Orange. We're back on Red is the New Orange. First half special, Johnny Gadamowitz, meaning you only had to watch the first 20 minutes to get a feel for where this game was going. It ended up in an 86-72 L at the hands of the Clemson Tigers, and Syracuse is back under 500 on the season at 9-10, 3-5 in conference play. First half might have been even worse than the final score indicates. First half score was 48-29. And by about the 10-minute mark, things fell apart. It one of those snowball, we had our first snow in North Carolina in about 2-3 years this past week. Actually, it was on Wednesday. Everything was canceled. Everything was shut down. And people were making snowmen. You start rolling that snowball, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And for Syracuse, that's exactly what happened in Little John Coliseum.
Yeah, it wasn't even close. It was a case of two teams that were just on totally different levels of talent, different levels of execution, different levels of feel. Little John Coliseum was rocking, and the Orange really weren't ready for it. Didn't do them any favors that Donnie Freeman, again, did not play. Syracuse hung for the first couple of minutes of the first half, and then after that, it was all Tigers the rest of the way. You thought Eddie Lampkin was going to hold his own against Victor Locken based on the first couple minutes of the game, and then Locken completely flipped that matchup on its head and was feasting on Lampkin down low. Syracuse could not stop Chase Hunter no matter what they tried. He was having pretty much whatever he wanted. Getting to the rim from three-point land, getting to the free throw line. Hunter was involved in all facets. And then how about Jaden Zachary, too, the Boston College transfer who we mentioned in our preview episode. He was really active on both ends and made life tough on this Syracuse backcourt. Not a bad game from J.J. Starling. In fact, a pretty good game from J.J. Starling.
A really good game in the first couple minutes. Like we talked about last week, Starling has saved his best for the stretch runs of games, and he turned it on early. He had 12 points in about the first 10 minutes.
And it really is a shame that it feels like JJ is starting to hit his stride and he's becoming that all-around type player that we know he has always been capable of and is starting to hit that. I don't want to say ceiling because there's always room for growth, but we're getting the best version of JJ Starling that I think we've had since his time stepping on campus. And there's just not enough there to complement him for it to translate to winning basketball.
JJ is striding and everyone else can barely crawl.
Yeah.
That's about what it looks like. He is playing at a different pace than the rest of the Syracuse offense. He is in a different headspace than the rest of the Syracuse offense. And even sometimes when he's out there, stuff just doesn't look right. The game first really turned about halfway through the first half. And watching the possession, Syracuse is attacking the left end. Brett Autry calls out a set. He smacks two fists together. And the action is supposed to start with Kyle Cuff starting at the left block, coming up around an Eddie Lampkin screen and catching a swing pass from Starling. Well, Cuff goes too early. Lampkin doesn't really set the screen. And they both kind of stand there for 5-6 seconds. And JJ's dribbling the ball like, all right, what am I supposed to do? Eventually, it turns into a dribble handoff with Lampkin, and it just doesn't work. Clemson then scores 5 straight points. And Red calls timeout. That was the first of 2 first-half timeouts for Syracuse. But those sort of things are pretty emblematic of what we've seen from the Syracuse team the entire year. Never really seems to be in sync. There's not a lot of times when you look at the floor and all five guys are focused or really clicking at a high level. And against these better teams, one run like that is enough. And then one Chase Hunter three. He made 4 first half threes, and he didn't make his first one until about the 8:30 mark. But then Syracuse, again, is losing the game plan, going under these screens. And just like Chucky Hepper did, and just like we mentioned, Chase Hunter makes 4 of 5 in the first half and has 18 first half points.
A lot of them, it felt like fed off of silly Syracuse turnovers too.
Yeah.
Orange coughed it up 14 times, not an egregious number, but when you consider the fact, Ian, that not many of those whatsoever were dead ball turnovers. Clemson was turning the Orange over a lot. I think they finished with 10 steals or something like that.
19 points off of 14 turnovers.
Yeah,
that's where you
so
make
it was not only the fact that offensively, again, there continues to be this lack of identity, but now it's translating to not just empty possessions, but giveaways, right? You're coughing up the basketball. Clemson, really good in transition, is taking advantage. And yeah, 19 points off of Syracuse turnovers is not going to cut it, particularly when on the defensive end, you're not going punch for punch with causing Clemson to turn the ball over. In fact, it was the opposite. In the first half, Clemson was getting to the bucket at will. A lot of points in the paint, a lot of dribble drive, handoff, screen and roll action, what have you. Just felt like Clemson had a lot more flow on offense, and it persisted into the second half too. Don't get it twisted. This is not a case of two different halves. Syracuse, even though they won the second half in the points department, there was a meaningless 3 at the end that barely made it that way. And Syracuse's second half struggles, while maybe not as glaring as the first half, were very much still there throughout the course of the full 40 minutes. Because let's be honest, when you're playing come from behind the whole game, you've got a lot of work to do. And Clemson, I don't know if they took their foot off the gas pedal a little bit or what, but it never looked like Syracuse was able to really find its footing, even though the numbers didn't stay as lopsided as they were initially.
26 points in the paint in the first half for Clemson, along with the points off turnover numbers. Just to kind of clean up the turnover point here, it's not like Syracuse is going to the basket and getting it stripped away. A lot of the times it isn't a excellent defensive play that is causing these turnovers. People aren't getting their pockets picked one-on-one. This is mostly from bad passes. I would say that, Johnny, would you agree with me there that a bad pass is probably the cause of about 75 to 80% of Syracuse's turnovers, whether it's telegraphed from down low to up top or cross court because nothing's going on offensively. Nobody's moving. It's just like, oh, there's a lane. Let me try to split the difference here. Those are all of Syracuse's turnovers, at least in the first half. Because after Clemson went on that first run, the offense turned more stale than a 6-week-old bag of bread. Ball went to Lampkin in the post. We got 8 sets of eyes on him. Ball went to Davis in the post. 8 sets of eyes on him. All right, can Starling make another tough 2? Can he get to the rack by himself? Nope. And here come the Tigers. That's where the offense was at the end of the first half. I'm not going to lie. By the second half, turned off the TV broadcast. I had to get ready for a little dinner I had. So turned on Matt Park and Coach Jim Saddlin on TK99, and they were about just as displeased as we are right now. And I think they said the same things that we're saying here today, and they were on the court at Little John. I almost said Memorial Stadium. That's where they play football. Little John Coliseum calling the game. That the execution was not there. The crispness that you see from high-level basketball teams was not there. And it just lacked the shine or the polish that teams that win at a high level have.
And it feels like we're doing this same song and dance, but in our defense, it for lack of a better description, it kind of has been the same song and dance for going on a month now.
Where's the improvement?
Feels like right.
Where's this is not again. I've already stood and planted my flag in defense of Red Autry. This is not going to be us calling for his job because we're not there. But where's the improvement with this team? I just want is it on the players? Because I don't know. Where is the improvement from Chris Bell? You can't be slumping for this long. Like where does Elijah Moore fit in and how can he take the next step? How do you get Lampkin to play an engaged 20 to 25 minutes of basketball? And beyond the fact that he got cooked in the pick and roll about 8 to 9 times because Victor Locken just stood outside the 3-point line. Syracuse is playing drop, and Lampkin has to make a decision about a player that's 15 feet away from him.
Right.
Like that really doesn't help. When you're chasing a ball screen as a guard and there's an acre of space between you and your big man because the big man can't move his feet.
I think that's the thing that's puzzling. Even in these dry spells, you usually have things that you can point to where you say, oh, yeah, but there was this. Oh, yeah, but we saw improvement here. And we don't really have those areas right now. Like 25 minutes from Jair Davis to the tune of 6 points. 24 minutes from Lucas Taylor, 4 points. A grand total of 4 points.
I can't get excited about Kyle Cuff anymore, man.
I can't either. And you just wonder if there is untapped potential still in the bag, or if this team has maximized the total firepower that it does have, and they're just not talented enough. Now, I think it's somewhere in between.
Yeah.
I think this is not an uber talented team, but that's not to say I don't think that Red and this staff can get more out of them. So I think the blame kind of does go full circle in needing to see better play on the court, but also needing to field a more talented roster. And that's a whole separate conversation, obviously, in its own right.
Yeah, and to track back to my original point here about the play that wasn't run correctly, right? That is both on the coaches to drill it into guys during a practice that you need to run full speed. Johnny, I'm sure when you sit in on a Cornell practice, or I got to watch a Siena shoot around actually with Jerry McNamara. At the end of the shoot around, guys shot for about 70 minutes, and then they got together and ran all their inbounds plays for the final 20. And every single thing, GMAC they'd walk it through once, nice and easy against the scout team, and then they'd run it about 4 times. Every single time, GMAC would blow the whistle afterwards and just start clapping and say, guys, we need to go faster. This needs to be quicker, and we need to run it at full speed. That may not be happening, or the emphasis on doing things quickly just might not be there. And I don't know if that's on the coaching staff to just keep on giving them the message, or if that's on the players not picking it up.
Probably somewhere in between. And I think what makes it frustrating, and this will tie us into, looking towards the Pitt Panthers here coming up this weekend, Ian, is that you look at the ACC, you alluded to it last episode. This is a conference right now that feels like it's kind of Duke, Clemson, Louisville, in no particular order. Take your pick there, 2, 3 after Duke. And then everybody else. Like this Syracuse team would not have to be world beaters to be in the top half of the conference. Like, it's right there for the taking. But for whatever reason, not only do they appear...
has gotten hot too. Wake just beat North Carolina.
That's true. Handily. That's true. We'll give Wake their flowers, and obviously more on the Demon Deacons.
Wake plays Duke on Saturday too, in Winston-Salem. So that's one to keep an eye on, and from a grand ACC standpoint.
Yeah, that's a big one as well. But you look around the conference and it feels like you can't help but ask yourself, what if a couple of losses, were flipped to wins at this point? And what if, you had a little bit of a hotter start to the season, and now you're not trying to pile in so many wins down the stretch when you just have a whole lot, not when you don't have a whole lot going for you.
I mean, if you beat Notre Dame on the road, and then maybe you stick around against Wake Forest, 5-3 puts you in a 4-way tie for 5th place.
Right. And you're right there. And even going back to the non-conference, you lose to Georgetown. You
Both
get
of the games in the Barclays Center. Yeah.
right. You lose those Barclays Center games. You mentioned that Notre Dame loss. So I feel like it's inevitably getting to that what if point of the year. Hopefully, it's not another what if with Pitt. Pitt's been reeling as of recently. They have lost 4 straight, but that is a little deceiving because those 4 losses include the top 3 teams in the conference, Duke, Louisville, and Clemson, in addition to a gritty Florida State squad. Right there against the Cardinals down the stretch, and they took Clemson to overtime. So even though it is a 4-game losing streak, Pitt's good, and Pitt's desperate and hungry for a win. If a 4-game losing streak against those teams becomes a 5-game losing streak, including Syracuse, then some people in Pittsburgh are going to really start to get angry and hit the panic button. So
Yeah.
this is a game that the Panthers are going to be ready to and show up ready to go.
Jeff Capel's been catching his fair share of heat as of late, partially just for some post-game antics. I think it was after the Florida State game when it was Malik Ewan who dunked with like a second left, and Jeff Capel started mouthing off like, hey, you shouldn't do that. It's the age-old sportsmanship thing, and whatever. It was a 12-point game, so the dunk didn't matter. But yes, Capel was mouthing off at the end. People were like, dude, stop worrying about this. Why are you setting a bad example for the kids? Focus, focus, focus. So things that people are never exactly happy with Pitt basketball, regardless of how they play or who they're playing. But this Pitt team is pretty darn talented, Johnny. It's not a bad team. It starts with Jalen Lowe, who's last year broke onto the scene as a freshman, was clearly one of the best players in the conference, even though at just 18 years old, out of Missouri City, Texas, of all players. But he's their leading scorer this year now that the Blake Hinsons of the world are gone, right? Nelly Cummings, you think of all those experienced guards that Pitt had a couple years back. Well, Jalen Lowe is the next guy, and he can still fill it up. Had 28 against Ohio State in the non-conference. Last year, took it to Syracuse, too. Not so much at the Pete, not so much on the road at the Dome, but had 20 points against Syracuse at the Pete and was 8 of 15 from the field. He's a sneaky player. His entire game is based on getting to the basket, and he's a lefty, too, which means it's an entirely different brand of possibility as to what he'll do with the basketball. But I think this is going to be another game where Eddie Lampkin has some problems. Because if it's not Cam Corrin, Florida State transfer, who's pretty big, 6'10", 235, and good at using his body to get where he wants, then you're going to have one of the Diaz-Graham twins. And we know them all too well.
These guys are still around, huh?
I mean, they're only juniors, man.
That's crazy.
They're only juniors.
Right, because they played as freshmen, or at least one of them.
Oh, they both played a good amount as freshmen. Guillermo and Jorge, who are both equally willing to step out and shoot the three. So Eddie Lampkin could be caught in a world of space and the unknown in this game. They'll run the middle pick and roll. Clemson did a lot from like pretty much isolating off a half of the floor. Pitt will set up that ball screen right in the middle and then space it out and hope that Ishmael Leggett, or maybe you've got a Zach Austin out there or Brandon Cummings, those guys can catch and shoot and be effective. Also, keep an eye out for Damian Dunn. I'm throwing a lot of names at you here, Johnny. You can kind of pick and choose. But Dunn is a Houston transfer who was injured to start the year, but he gives Pitt the veteran presence as a fifth-year senior who's been on Final Four teams and gritty teams down there in Houston that have made good runs.
Yeah, and Pitt's offense is among one of the best in the conference. They're up over 80 points per game. They're really efficient as a team, shooting it at 47%. Nearly half their shots are going down. So if Syracuse defensively is kind of stuck in the mud for the first couple of minutes, it could be one of those games where Pitt is not only able to knock down shots, something they've done all year long, but get to the rim. I think this is probably going to be another really stiff test for Syracuse from a defensive angle of, okay, can you put the clamps on and kind of hold at bay an offense that has really had their way with some of the upper echelon defenses across the conference so far this year. Put up 78 against Louisville. Duke held them to 47, but obviously Duke is a little bit of a different animal. But they are no stranger to getting in shootouts. And, we'll see if Syracuse can kind of keep pace offensively. Again, another game you'd love to have Donnie Freeman. No signs pointing towards us expecting that to happen. Anything you get from him is a bonus at this point, I would think at least. But again, you don't want to let this snowball any worse than it already has. It feels like, you hear that and it feels like Syracuse is on a 6 or 7 game losing streak. They're not. Let's not forget, they did just beat Notre Dame just before Clemson. And there are some winnable games over the course of the next week or so. But this would really be one that you'd like to tuck in your back pocket and have so that you don't have to pick it up later on.
Yeah, I think overall we just sound doom and gloom here because we know the ceiling is low.
Right.
And everyone knows the ceiling is low and there is not much room for improvement going forward. That's the tough thing to stomach with all this because we thought at the beginning of the year this could be a team that looked very different from the teams of Syracuse past. Back to Pitt a little bit. 21st most efficient offense in the country per KenPom. Shoot free throws really well too, which makes a big difference. Almost 80% as a team from the free throw line. That'll win you some conference games, even though it hasn't for Pitt over the past couple. That will definitely come around and help them down the stretch. Also averaging about 9 to 10 made threes a game. I don't like that number as a Syracuse fan. That does not sound fun. That sounds like getting run out of the gym.
9 to 10 on average.
Yeah.
Remember, which means against teams that struggle to defend from downtown, you could be looking at a number that's a little higher than 9 to 10. Time will tell. We'll see. I think both offensively and defensively, there are matchup problems. Pitt's got the track record on both ends, particularly the offensive one. And Jeff Capel's squads, say what you will about Capel and these antics as of late, but they always show up ready to go. You're never going to get an undisciplined Pitt squad. They're always going to kind of, have a focus, have a game plan, and execute. And Syracuse has certainly learned that the hard way over the course of the past couple of years. This is one, though, that you hope that you can get and kind of propels you. Look, Stanford, Cal coming up, winnable games before the going gets tough with Duke on the horizon. So next thing you know, Ian, we're looking at February. And when it's February, everybody wants to talk tournament. This team's not even near tournament talk yet.
Not sniffing any semblance of March. It's part of a loaded slate of games on Saturday. Houston and Kansas is the headliner in Allen Fieldhouse. Syracuse tips at 12:30 on ESPN2. The Orange only have one game on ESPN proper this season for anyone keeping track. But 12:30 on ESPN2, Syracuse and Pitt. It is in the Dome, so hopefully the crowd is somewhat decent for an old Big East rival. And maybe that'll fuel the Orange to stick around and pull something out. That'll wrap it up here for Red is the New Orange. Follow us on Twitter, F68_Cuse, and keep tuning into the live streams, man. We appreciate all you guys checking us out live on the Field of 68 podcast network, whether it be on YouTube, whether it be on Twitter, or maybe you catch us after the live streams where the video feeds are still available and you can listen on Apple or Spotify or wherever you want to get your podcast. Johnny and Ian signing off. We'll talk to you next week to preview